Welcome to Heal Through Humor, the podcast designed for you to learn about yourself and laugh along the way. In each episode, we'll explore the healing power of humor as I sit down with guests to talk about mental health, relationships, self-growth, and the ever-evolving world of social media. I'm your host, Talia Bombola. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Heal Through Humor. Today's very special guest is Dr. Judy Ho, and I've been waiting for you to be on this podcast. It's been a long time coming, and I'm happy for you to introduce yourself. So if you want to take it away, go ahead.
Well, Talia, it's so great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
You're welcome.
I'm Dr. Judy. I'm a clinical and forensic neuropsychologist. I'm a professor at Pepperdine University and also author of several books. And my newest book is The New Rules of Attachment, which I'm super excited about. And yeah, I just have realized how important attachment is in all phases of our lives.
Yes.
And Talia and I were just bonding about how we both have little ones in our lives now. And, now we're really living this, not just educating others and helping others about it. Like we're also living our own version of it. So it's also very timely.
Yes.
And so I actually wrote the bulk of my book while I was in the throes of new parenthood. And I proposed this book to be published even before I knew I was pregnant. So it's just been like a full cycle thing. And I
love it.
Anyway, I'm just really happy to be able to talk about this more and also to share that essentially, even if you've developed insecure attachment at an earlier time in life, there's always time to heal. It's never too late. And that's a big message of the book. Yeah.
I the way that you wrote it is approachable and easily digestible, even if you don't have a background in training. But for like myself, who probably has like too much training on it, it was very helpful to be like, oh, that's how I can say it in a normal way to like a lay person rather than like all the psychoanalytic jargon where some clients just usually trail off. And I'm like you said, but anyway, you're going to be okay. Like it's malleable. Like you can relearn it. It's not like you're doomed just because, and just honestly, just because you had secure attachment in childhood doesn't mean potentially that it could stay that way forever. If you go through enough traumatic incidences, losses, and events that aren't processed right, it can kind of veer, at least that's what I've seen, it can veer off into sometimes more anxious or avoidant. There's still the secure base, but I would say it is malleable. It's going to be with you lifelong, and it's a breathing, almost like a breathing organism. It can change depending on what you give it.
Yeah, agree.
So what got you started being interested in attachment? Did you just wake up one day and you're like, I have to write a book about this?
Right. For me, actually, during most of my training, I was very much a skills-based therapist. Like a lot of my training was in CBT and secondarily in DBT. And then I became more interested in acceptance and commitment therapy, which I think you're starting to veer off from like westernized ideas completely, because ACT also combines like Eastern philosophies and like mindfulness and all these things that I was like, wow, like that really adds a lot actually. But I think, of course, I still love skills-based interventions. I think that there's important role that they play.
Right.
But no matter how much you want to be in the here and now, people always want to talk about the past. Like they want to solve the problem of the here and now, but then they're like, well, I'm having this problem because I have some unresolved trauma or relationship struggles with my parents and my family members that keep resurfacing every time we have a holiday get together. And I realized that to be able to really break those patterns that aren't working for you, you do have to work to understand and heal the wounds of the past.
Yes.
Otherwise, you'll just keep coming up with the same struggles over and over again. And now you have the skills to work on them and to feel better in the moment, but then they'll just kind of come back up again. The same patterns will keep occurring if you don't look at those pivotal experiences in your past and how they're shaping your self-talk now.
Yes. And I, as being trained as psychoanalytic and psychodynamic, that's like everything. It's all of my work. It's like my bread and butter and my soul's purpose on earth. It's like, well, what was your parents' relationship like? And then that tells me truly, like, it's like a weird mind magician. Like it tells me pretty much everything I will need to know about at least your blueprint, not necessarily the work you've done since, but like if your subconscious blueprint is love involves pain and struggle and somebody's going to abandon me, and if it gets too tough they won't stay, or substance use, like you name it, whatever is interwoven in the blueprint, it doesn't matter how much you consciously learn and how many podcasts and books you read. If you don't go unlearn and rewire those subconscious beliefs and process those traumas, and on a cellular level almost, it doesn't mean anything. Your brain's like, that's nice, but you're still unworthy of love. So good try again. And you're like, why are all my relationships
Right.
failing? Let's look back, at least for me, like infancy to childhood, even if it's preconscious memories. The reason why you sometimes thwart or self sabotage in relationships is because of that unworthiness, or because it would be so against anything you've seen possible. Your brain's like, that's not going to happen. Delete, or that's not going to
Right.
happen. Cheat on the person. So I'm curious to see your thoughts
Right.
on that.
Yeah, it's really true, and I think so much of what we learn in those early years, because we are coming into this world kind of like blank slates. I know that it's not completely blank.
Right.
Obviously, we
Right.
have genetics, we have
Of course.
temperament, but we are trying to learn everything we possibly can from our environment. And we're trying to take in that information in a rapid way, like it's
True.
rapid acquisition, so that you can then utilize it in your life, and it becomes those blueprints, it becomes those templates. So you call
Mm-hmm.
them blueprints, I sometimes call them operating systems. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like the base operating
Yep.
system that you have in your life. And the operating system consists of your core beliefs. It
Mm-hmm.
consists of how you think about yourself, what you think is going to happen when you reach out for help, and whether or not you deserve good outcomes. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just that basic.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so even if you feel like you've done a lot of the work or you have good insight, if you have been exposed to certain emotional imprints when you were younger, that have caused you to take away certain messages, even as an adult,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're stressed,
Mm-hmm.
those things are going to creep up on you.
True.
So you know intellectually that maybe the way to respond in this situation is to do X, but like instinctually you'll just want to do Y, and then you end
Yes.
up creating the same cycle that you lived
Yes.
when you were a child.
Yeah,
Yeah.
instinct is a huge core driver for how we behave, and our hormones, evolutionary psychology. I geek out on that, and probably more, just as much as psychoanalytic and psychodynamic theory. And it's all
Mhm.
interwoven. And it's how do we
Yes.
override that instinct, and how do we, all of us go into, what is it, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. All of us do all of those. It's just in a different order. So if you
Right.
think about it, like how many times are you nice to the person to their face, and then you're like, oh, I should have said that, and then you win the argument in the shower. That's the
Yeah.
fawn first, then the flight might be you leave, and then the fight comes later. Like we all do it in
Yeah.
a
We all
specific
do it.
order, or we fight later and we're like, God, I probably overdid it. Oh, okay, maybe I should
Mhm.
be nice to them, and then I avoid them. So it's
Mhm.
knowing that about yourself. How do you override that instinct and behave almost in a way that's like a higher self, or a better
Yeah.
version of yourself that isn't pure instinct? Or you could even
Yeah.
say, I want to scream and rip your head off right now, instinct. However, I won't, because I know that that's
Right.
not healthy, and that's you overriding it. Even that's progress compared to just yelling at someone.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally. And I think that all of us, I mean, sometimes people beat themselves up for having these instincts. And I want to tell everyone, like, just a reminder, you might already know this, but it's
Yes.
like that instinct is to protect yourself. Like,
Yes.
it's just you trying to protect yourself. So
Hmm.
don't beat yourself up over it.
Hmm.
Right. And because of whatever past experience we've had, we instinctually want to protect ourselves in certain different ways. It might be our first response to like try to avoid and go away, or to like go into the fight right away, or like try to argue, try to be like the bigger presence in the
Right.
room.
Right.
But all of that is coming from a place of self-protection, and that's
Hmm.
just like a basic human
Survival.
universal instinct. So don't blame yourself for that. It's just the ways that we tend to respond instinctually does differ based on the past experiences that we've had.
Hmm. What would you say, in your experience, either research or clinically, or even teaching, draws this is a trending topic, so we may as well just get it out of the way in the beginning. I have my own theories. The anxious and avoidant trap, the feedback loop, that magnetism. What in your
Mhm.
experience creates that?
Well, I think so much of it is trying to redo a part of your past and
Yeah.
hoping for a different outcome.
Yeah.
Like if you're a anxiously attached person, you may have had a caregiver, an important adult in your life that was kind of dismissive, and you kind of had to like always check in with them to make sure that they were still going to be around and that they
Yeah.
still loved you. And so then as an adult, you become attracted to those same people because it's what you knew as a child, but you're kind of hoping, at least subconsciously, you don't
Hmm.
usually consciously know that,
Right.
but subconsciously you're hoping that you're going to get a different experience this time. And then therefore that's going to be your self validation.
Hmm.
You know, it's
Hmm.
like, well, my dad didn't really acknowledge me or show me consistently that I was loved, but maybe this partner will.
Hmm.
And then if they do, then almost like you get to learn that for yourself, that, oh, well, maybe it means that my past can be rewritten. But
Right.
you can rewrite your past in a different way. You can
Mhm.
rewrite your understanding of the past in a different way instead of just getting into the same type of cycle that ends up traumatizing people on
Mhm.
various levels. Because then inevitably when you attract yourself to an avoidantly attached person, they're probably going to behave similarly to your caregiver.
Yeah.
And then that's going to feed back on your own self beliefs like, oh, I guess I really am not worth anything, you know?
Mhm.
So it actually makes those negative beliefs stronger.
Yeah, it's like repetition compulsion meets confirmation bias, and then they end up in therapy and
Yes.
they're like, "I don't know how to." And I'm like, "Well, how do you feel when somebody actually does show up for you and you don't have to question it?" And I work through this even in my own therapy, and usually their response is like, like this visceral nausea almost and repulsion of
Yeah.
like, "Wait, that's a thing I should be attracted to? You mean I don't have to second guess?" And and I'm like, it's if you're after the adrenaline hormone and the dopamine, there's other ways to get that met, but typically in a
Mhm.
secure functioning relationship, which is what we all try to strive for, I would imagine.
Right.
Yeah, whatever repulses you is or gives you the ick is actually the healthy thing to go for if it
Yeah.
is indeed the secure piece of it. And then for others who are secure, they're like, wait, you actually like that shit where you guess if they don't like you back? And it's like, oh yeah, it's thrilling. Like we all have our own stuff to work through, but I'm glad that you
Exactly.
described that because that literally is like exactly what repetition compulsion is. Like, let me read you the past and see if it's going to be any different
Right.
miraculously with no other thing being different. And in fact, many factors being the exact same, just a different person. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
So in your research, what if what would you say causes the insecure attachments, the disorganized, avoidant, and anxious?
I think that it's, a variety of different things from having parents who weren't really consistently available,
Mhm,
who maybe dismissed your emotions or acted like they were overwhelmed when you expressed your emotions, or just gave you really confusing messages about like what love and support means.
mhm,
I think that obviously, depending on the particular brand that you received, you're going to be more likely to develop one of the insecure attachment styles, and it might be more specifically
yeah,
drawn. Like
yeah,
the avoidantly attached, generally they learned from a long time ago that uh they get the most support and the most accolades and the most validation when they're performing in some way, whether it's being the star child of the family or like being
mhm,
great at school or
mhm,
sports. And people kind of congregate around them when they're achieving. So then they start to learn this message that like, well, that's how I get self-worth. So they start to
mhm,
become much more invested in goals and things, and they don't actually trust other people, so they tend to be very isolative when they're struggling.
mhm,
And then when somebody develops anxious attachment, oftentimes it's because their parents were really seemingly stressed out with their own things,
yeah,
sometimes were not available, but it was also because their parents couldn't really regulate very well, and so they're watching this. Maybe they've seen models of their parent being anxious with one another,
mhm,
and so then they develop this idea that like I always have to check in with the people around me to make sure that I still have support.
mhm,
And they end up as adults becoming people pleasers because it's one of the
yeah,
ways in which they can ensure people stay around them, right?
right,
And then I think with the disorganized, and I want to say too, 99% of parents are trying to do their best. So obviously, this whole discussion is not about blaming
correct.
parents.
Yeah.
There is that 1% that's just like, okay, you should never have become a
There,
parent,
there is the 1% where it is about blaming the parents.
Right,
Yeah,
right. But
yeah,
99% of the
it's
time,
true.
if you're able to step back, you know that your parents probably they were not perfect, but they were struggling with their own stuff. Maybe they have their own intergenerational trauma.
Yes.
But nevertheless, kids who develop disorganized attachment, they do go through major stress and trauma and chaos in their upbringing.
Yeah.
Maybe they had a parent who had alcohol use disorder, a parent who had unmanaged mental health issues. Maybe they like witnessed domestic violence in the parenting. Maybe they've even
Yeah.
actually gone through like overt trauma, like sexual or physical abuse of some sort. And they just become used to chaos being a norm in their
Mhm,
life.
mhm,
And so essentially, I see the disorganized attached person developing this because they never learned any semblance of emotion regulation at all
mhm,
during their
mhm.
childhood. So they're constantly in fight or flight. They're attracted to chaos inadvertently because it's just their norm. So like when things are calm, they think something's wrong. So they sometimes will inadvertently cause chaos. And then they're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, at least I know how to deal with
Yeah,
this
they're like,
environment,
"Oh, my normal." Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm,
And then I think that it's also unique in that disorganized individuals tend not to trust others, but they also don't trust themselves, right? So like the avoidantly attached person is kind of like, I trust myself, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
trust other people.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiously attached is like, I don't know if I trust myself, but I trust other people. If they say that I'm good, then I'm good, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
the disorganized attached person, generally, they don't trust themselves, they don't like
Or another.
themselves,
Right.
but they also don't trust or like other people. And
Mm-hmm.
so that obviously creates a lot of problems in terms of actual thriving. It's like you can't
Mm-hmm.
get to thriving if you're just always feeling that way.
No, a majority of the couples that I worked with, I mean, it's not a wonder now looking back on it in retrospect, the flooding of couples that I got, the intakes with the disorganized attachment being prevalent and causing the conflict enough to be in couples therapy, especially during COVID, was fascinating. Like it was just this huge
Yeah.
influx, like second half of, June to December of 2020. And the core of it, at least what I noticed from the work that I did and the research I've done previously, was the exact the in the mind's eye of the child and the infant growing up. Because some of the
Mhm.
people I treated, their trauma started from when they were infants. The neglect, the inappropriate caregiving, the abuse, you name it, was from the time they were almost like brought home from the hospital throughout their whole life, or it started a little bit
Mhm.
later if the primary parents weren't together and they had the boyfriend and the girlfriend coming in, and it was
Mhm.
kind of like a transient second parenting or allo parenting. That
Right.
there's this key that the exact people who are supposed to keep you safe from the harm of the world and the trauma of the world are the ones inflicting it and allowing it and enabling it.
Right.
And that there are a few cases I've had over the many years I've done this, like one or two, where I truly, because of how severe and how young and how enduring all of the trauma was and the lapse before the person sought treatment and how many relationships that were just fraught with this before,
Mhm.
I was honest with them. I said it's not that I'm going to say you can't heal. That's not up to me. I'm not like a higher power like God or whatever. Like I can't decide that. But based on what you shared, be mountains moving for this to shift. And that's not
Mhm.
me saying we can't work on it and treat it, but just to empathize with like this is so deep, this is so far beyond and transcending this one relationship you're in. If you're sharing with us in the couples room that like every relationship you've been in has been like this, including the one you had with your parents, we
Right.
have different work cut out for us. So it's not, there's, I think, ranges. Obviously, I'm sure you've seen this too. It's like mild to severe of kind of these attachments. And it's not a diagnosis. I want to be very clear. Like attachment style is not in the DSM, it's not in the PDM. This is not, it's
Right.
clinical terms, but they're not a diagnosis. But it can range from small protest behavior to like, I blew up my entire relationship and caused a fight so bad I had to call the cops. Like, pick your level of spiciness.
Yeah, and I think that, like you said, there is a range. And so some people, I feel like they're like, okay, well, mine isn't so pronounced. And then some people are like, well, yeah, mine results in some really, really significant like problems. But
Mhm.
I still think that either way, like there's always room for improvement. Sometimes people with
Definitely.
organized attachment, they just give up. They're like, well, you know, what can I do? Like this is just how I've been all my life, and I'm gonna be this way forever. It's like,
Mhm.
but you're not.
Right. It's
There
not
is
doomed.
a choice that you can make, and
Right.
maybe everybody's progress is going to be different, and
True.
that's okay. But um I don't think it's ever too late. That's really what I believe, and I
Yeah.
tell that to my patients. Like I've seen like
Mhm.
radical healing,
Mhm.
even when people have really, really horrific pasts,
Yeah.
really, really significant attachment issues.
Yeah. My suggestion, the couple of people that I was referencing mentally just a moment ago, my suggestion to them was, why don't we take a break from couples? Like, if they've broken up, I'm like, you can still do a boatload of work at individual. It may not be that success will look like this relationship remaining intact throughout couples therapy. That doesn't mean you're unlovable. It just truly means like this isn't a good fit. Like sometimes couples come in and there's so much damage that has been done regardless of attachment style. I have like maybe one wish at making this any different. I'm good. I'm not like a
Mhm.
soothsayer. Like I'm not a magician. I can't just be like, here you go, Men
Right.
in Black pen. Nothing has happened to you. Like it's so much more than attachment when people are in relationships. Hey there, listeners. Are you tired of settling for less than you deserve in your relationships? Do you ever feel like you're not being seen, heard, or valued the way that you want? Or maybe you've been wondering why you keep attracting the same kinds of people into your life, or why certain patterns seem to repeat themselves in your relationships. The answer might be deeper than you think, and you can find it in my new course. Rewire Your Relationships is a transformative course designed to help you stop settling for less than you deserve and start embodying your most confident, assertive, and authentic self in your relationships.
You'll explore how your early experiences and parental influences have shaped your views on love, dating, and self worth. This isn't just about tips and tricks for dating, it's about understanding the core beliefs that drive your relationships that you attract. You'll learn how to break free from those old patterns and start creating the kind of connections that truly reflect who you are. Imagine stepping into a relationship with clarity and confidence, knowing you're attracting people who value and respect you for who you really are, your deeply authentic self. The Rewire Your Relationship course gives you the tools to rewrite your relationship story, one where you're no longer settling, but thriving. Visit taliabombola.com/rewire your relationships or check the link in the show notes for more.
What other factors do you see playing a role in either healthy or unhealthy relationships far beyond attachment?
Yeah, I think, a lot of it has to do with your self concept and your self belief.
Mm-hmm.
I spend a lot of time talking in my book about self talk and how much it influences the reality that you have.
Yeah.
And when you are someone who, whether or not that originates from attachment issues or something else, but if you are going to speak negatively about your own self worth and
Mm-hmm.
what's likely to happen in your life and how people are going to respond to you, like you do end up inadvertently creating that reality.
Right.
Um, and this is not like The Secret or anything like that. Like I haven't actually fully read The Secret. I will admit that.
Yeah.
But I think like some people's critique of The Secret, whether you're a fan or not,
Mm-hmm.
like some
Mm-hmm.
people's critique of it was that like, oh, it's just about like positive thinking and that's toxic, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about not having negative self-talk ever. I mean, that's just impossible. Like,
True.
but it's more about like the kind of negative self-talk that is so unwavering and so damaging because
Mm,
the way that you speak to yourself is so persistently undervaluing everything that you are.
right.
And if you are going to speak that way without more of a balance in terms of how you speak, like, balance means that maybe you do acknowledge a mistake that you made, but
Mm-hmm.
also knowing that you're not like the worst person in the world because you made that mistake.
Yes.
But unfortunately, I do talk to a lot of patients who tell me like, oh, I'm only even telling you a fraction of what I'm thinking in my head about myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like you should see how bad it is, really, because I can't even say it out loud. It's so ugly.
Mm,
But when you have such pervasively negative self-talk, like it's very, very hard to affect positive change in your life or to even build resilience because there isn't that belief that you can.
true.
So if there isn't that belief that you can, there isn't that belief that you can cope better, then you can go to all the therapy that you want, but you still won't actually make an action plan out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think self concept is huge when it comes to that. It also dictates how you perceive and interpret others' actions or
Mhm.
behaviors or assumed intentions while you're in the relationship with the person. And even if the other person's like, no, that wasn't what I intended, it's like if I don't trust myself or others, or if I only trust
Mhm.
myself and not you, attachment mixed with self concept is going to kind of paint how I have those interactions. And I
Right.
think it highlights what you're sharing, highlights how important it is to do our own individual work, not only before, but also during, especially after we get into a relationship,
Mhm.
because we're always going to be in a relationship with ourselves. That's like the number one constant for our whole life, and that's ever evolving. We may or may not stay with a partner for life, but we will be with ourselves for the rest of our life.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually a huge message in my book, which is like, having secure attachment starts with you first. You have to have a
Yes.
secure attachment to
Yes.
yourself and your own
Yes.
self concept. Like, you have to be able to model that
Mm-hmm.
for yourself
Mm-hmm.
because you can't expect somebody else to fix your attachment. I think that that sometimes can happen as well, which is like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I found the perfect partner and
Oh, mine.
now my insecure attachment's all done. It's like, well,
No.
yeah, in this particular moment,
Yeah.
but like they're human, they have their own stuff and they're going to quote unquote fail you at some point even
Mm-hmm.
if they're not trying to.
Mm-hmm.
And then what? Like then it's not really going to actually work so well because then if you are only relying on them to heal your attachment, then when something goes awry, it's like you feel even more hopeless. Like, okay, well now what? And I thought that this was going to be the person who was going to bring
Mm-hmm.
all this change, and because it didn't last, and does that mean that I don't deserve that change? And can I even achieve it? Like, then all of that negative self-talk will just start coming back again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the way that we talk to ourselves when the relationship is going well is just as important as the way we talk to ourselves when it's not going well or when it's ended. And what does it make
Yes.
us, what story does it make us tell about ourselves? And if we go through a breakup and we're able to have self reflection of, okay, here's where I could have shown up differently. Here's where they could have shown up differently. And we aren't a good match. Or here's the other ways that we actually tried to make it better. We either went to therapy or listened to a podcast or read a book. Like being honest in your kind of the autopsy or the postmortem, if you will, of the relationship, but holding all sides accountable, including the version of the relationship that didn't get to come to fruition. It maybe isn't meant to be with that person. So I tell my clients, like, you could choose in part to spend most of the rest of the next few years of your life lamenting this one didn't work. It might not be the most productive though. Like, can we do that for a little bit, then focus on what did you learn from it and how do you want to apply that differently in the next relationship. And I recommend them read The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, and to not take it personally. Yes, we can contribute to our own demise in some ways. However, if even in cheating, substance use, because I'll work with some pretty intense couples, and I've been there too myself personally with my ex, like, what does it say about them that they would treat themselves that way is a better question, rather than why would they do this to me? How could they do this to me? How could they do that to themselves? Like, and do I want to be with somebody who treats themselves that way? That's really where I angle it, like existentially for my clients. So like, oh, I never thought about that. I'm like, you can be upset about it, but also they're doing it to themselves. You just happen to be in their life and you were kind of the collateral damage.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's such a good point, that you can really tell a lot about somebody and how they feel and how they're going to eventually treat you in terms of how they treat themselves, right? That's an important piece of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And not getting so stuck in the projections or the limerence in the beginning of the relationship that it pulls you out of seeing certain red flags or certain behavioral patterns where you're like, oh, I didn't see that. And the most common one I've worked with couples is the kind of the drinking and the codependency piece, where in the beginning they're like going out to the bars and they're hanging out and they're having wine nights and whatever. And they're like, but we never really did anything else sober. It's not that they were drunk every time they hung out, but like alcohol was in some way, or weed or whatever was in some way interwoven. And now a few years in, they're like, well, I want to, grow up and quit all that and let's be this. And the other person's like, I didn't sign up for that. Like, I have no plans on stopping whatever the behavior is. It can come as a shock to both. And if I was so stuck in the projection in the beginning of one day it'll magically be different, and I don't double check with my partner, that is on me. Like, the onus is on me to take responsibility. Like, I went so many years in assuming it would be different, but I never stopped to verify. So many couples, may good or bad aside, maybe wouldn't last as long if they stopped to verify those assumptions that they have in the beginning versus wait around and wait to be told by the other person, like, oh yeah, I agree with you, or I don't agree with you on that.
Right. Yeah. It's such a good point. Sometimes we have all of these narratives in our own, like, all these expectations, and we're not even checking with our partner. It's like so important to have that conversation and be direct about it, because, chances are, there's 70 to 80% of people in the world walking around with insecure attachment. Like, most likely your partner has some shadow of an insecure attachment,
Yes.
Yeah.
They're not the perfectly. All my clients are like, well, when I tell them, I'm like, oh, you mean the lucky ones, like the ones who came out of childhood unscathed because their parents were just so attuned. I'm like, yeah, usually they partner off, at least what the research used to show. I haven't seen a new study on this, was the amount of people who met, like when they were surveying and asking people where they met their partner, it was more, now with dating apps is probably a whole that would throw off all the data previously, but it was a lot of the people met through like a group, a church group, a work group, whatever, like a kind of some sort of organization or community-based organization, a friend of a friend, so like a warm referral, or what was the third one, like out at a bar or a restaurant, which more often than not, statistically, but you'd hear this kind of the exception to the rule with the movie He's Just Not That Into You highlights this perfectly, where it's like, but so-and-so met other so-and-so at a bar and then they got married, and that's the exception. It's more the exception that, like you're saying, 80%, it's like the one friend group and the other friend group go out, the one secure person from that, it's like happens to be their one night out, meets the other friend group with that secure person's one night out, they meet, and then they they couple, and then they self-select out of the dating pool and they leave that. But that's the story that we're told, is like, well, this couple that I know is super successful met, it's because they're the exception. That's not often the rule. And that's now what we're seeing, instead of it being the alcohol goggles or whatever when you're out drinking with your friends, it's now the hiding behind social media. That's just as, or dating apps, that's just as much of a mask. Here's your best foot forward. And I always joke that and this is not I mean, it's kind of a knock, but it's like a funny knock on dating apps. Like, you just go on enough dates and eventually you're like, this is why you were single on a dating app. And that's not to say that we couldn't say the same for ourselves, but
Right.
usually if you see that like repeat users over the course of however many years they've been on it, you're like, something's got to give. Like, there has to
Mhm.
be some internal change to stop that pattern.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We kind of are waiting for like that one magic thing to happen
Mm-hmm.
to take all of this away. It's like, well, but you can take a lot of this into your own hands and also being honest with yourself in terms of, where the pain points are and like the things that you can actually do versus just like, oh, well, I'm just going to rely on this one story or like this
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I heard so
Mm-hmm.
long ago. It's like, yeah, but like you said, so oftentimes that's an exception to the rule. Also, you're only seeing the version from the outside. Like
Yes.
they may have done a lot of their own self work too,
True.
to get to where they are. Yeah.
True. We don't always know what goes on behind the scenes, if they are even doing the work or what they've chosen to look past or what they've grown through. I think it's like
Yep.
off both ends of the spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say
Exactly.
that you've seen, whether that's like with your students or the clients that you work with, would you say that you've seen like a shift in terms of being able to take accountability, honesty, autonomy, or because the way I'm thinking of it is like it used to be more common of like one partner blamed the other partner when there was a breakup, or there was like
Yeah.
they're like the problem child in the family, right? The identified patient. But now with a lot of these new age podcasts and books and people are learning about themselves, it's like, here's my role and here's your role. Have you seen people have trouble actually honestly looking inward and being like, oh wait, maybe I am part of the problem?
Yeah, I've definitely seen people actually be more willing to
Okay,
self-reflect
cool.
and take some
Cool.
accountability, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Obviously, it doesn't happen all the time, but I do
Yeah.
see like a more of a willingness to say like, let me look at my part, which of course is so helpful when you're
Yeah.
doing couples or family work. It's like it's not just one person, it's not just that
Yes.
one problem child or one problem
Mm-mm.
problem partner. Like everybody plays a role in some
Mm-hmm.
way.
It's the
Yeah.
system. Yeah. Even with couples where it's like one has an active substance use problem, the other usually has an active codependent tendency
Mhm.
concern, or even with couples that it's like one is more narcissistically traded, one is more codependently traded. What is it? I can never remember his name. He wrote Human Magnet Syndrome, that it exists on a continuum where it's like if
Mhm.
I think I'm the best and I'm self-centered and I want to be around people who can be fuel for that, that's like a codependent stream of like, of course I'll be your supply, and then you don't realize it because you're assuming in the end that you'll be the special one, and you are, but almost in a way that you're going to get treated extremely poorly, because if they don't need you as a supply anymore, and that goes also with like substance use and codependent, you're not going to enable me, well, I guess this relationship isn't going to work. And I've seen that a lot in the
Right.
families. I used to run a codependency recovery group for families. They could like log on to Zoom and be like, what do I do about this? How do I support? Do I support? I don't want to enable. And to teach them of like, no, actually what you used to think was supporting is enabling, and what you're thinking is enabling in this case, or would be mean to set a boundary, is actually going to be the best thing for them. Like, stop giving them money, stop letting them come
Yeah.
home at 2 a.m. when they're drunk and they're like, oh, but what if they don't like me? And that's what you're touching on in the beginning of the episode. That's the people pleasing. But people
Exactly.
pleasing is inherently manipulative. Like,
Yeah.
I'm making you think a certain way about me so you like me and don't leave me. That's manipulative.
Right, right,
I don't know why that
exactly.
doesn't get talked about more.
I know, because I think oftentimes people who are people pleasers, they see themselves as a martyr almost,
I'm so
and that's
nice. It
probably
could
why.
never be me. No, it's
Right?
you. Like,
Yeah, yeah. You got to
yeah,
take some responsibility for
yeah,
your behaviors for
yeah.
sure. Yes.
It's little old me. I could never. And I think that's part of the manipulation, is that other people would never suspect that. But that, how, I don't know if you've worked with a lot of, I'm sure you have, like a lot of people pleasers, where then they get upset and they're like, how could this person not appreciate this thing that I did for them that they never even asked me to do, that
Yep.
cost me so much whatever resource to do, and how dare they? And it's like, did
Right.
they want it? Well, no, but I think that they should want it, and therefore I made it,
Right.
like I did it because they should, I know best for them. Like,
Exactly.
no,
But you don't.
no,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
You don't get to demand appreciation for something that someone didn't ask for. Like, the level of
Mhm.
appreciation is going to be so different if they're like, "Hey, I really need help with whatever it is," and you help them with that. No, don't assume what help would look like. Ask them what help would look like. I think that's a
Yeah.
key takeaway too, with like trying to stop people pleasing. If you're listening to this and you struggle with that, like, double check with the person what they actually want. Don't just assume and then expect them to be happy in return.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes we think, well, this is what I would want. It's like, yeah, but we're all different. So you do have to check in with that person. You do have to
Mhm.
ask and you have to find out, what would be actually the most helpful to you,
Mhm. Mhm.
truly. Yeah.
Yeah, and then not in a projective way of like, well, I would like this, so I'm going to. It's like it's not a self gift. Like, what if
Yeah.
you just got everybody else something you wanted for Christmas, not what was on their list? You're like,
Exactly.
I know you sent me the list, but this is much nicer. Like, it looked
Exactly.
like you needed new pots and pans when I was over at your house the last time. They're like, what the
Right.
heck? Like, I just
Yep.
wanted a candle. I didn't want this.
Yep.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. When you work with your clients, what are some of the main topics that they come in wanting to work on? Because I know you have your book, so obviously I would imagine that guides them to find you. But I wanted
Yeah.
to ask because I'm curious.
Yeah, when people come, and they want, help, oftentimes it's because they're stuck in some kind of negative pattern that they can't get
Hmm.
out of, like some
Hmm.
kind of negative cycle. And then my first book was about stopping self-sabotage because that
Hmm.
was such a common through line for all the people that I was working with. But I think, as I started to do more and more work with these individuals and kind of them examining where their self-sabotage comes from, so much of it came from attachment. And so a lot of my patients actually are relatively well versed and will literally say, yeah, I know I have my attachment issues. They'll literally throw that term around because they've heard of it at some
Hmm.
point. But I think there's also patients who don't know, but they're just saying, I don't feel connected. I don't feel safe. Like they don't feel emotional safety. They feel like their nervous system's constantly dysregulated. And that I think is always, an interesting piece of it. And now that more people are talking about burnout and being in fight or flight all the time, like
Right.
those are things that people are seeking help with too. Is like, I just feel dysregulated all the time and I don't know how to get to a place of feeling safe.
Hmm.
And obviously without feeling safe we can't self-actualize. It's just
Yep.
survival every day, and we
Yeah.
can't do that in the long run. That really hurts our mental health and our physical health.
Hmm. When you see clients start to get like towards that self actualization, what are they coming in with and sharing is actually different in their life? Are they having healthier relationships? Are they actually using coping skills? Like
Yeah.
what are those precursors to then being like, wait, I think I'm on that path?
Yeah, I think that they're really feeling like they're building true resilience. Like it's not just a coping strategy for right now, but it's like, oh, no matter what comes my way, like I think I can handle it.
Hmm.
Like, will
Hmm.
I like it? No, but can I handle it? Yes.
Radical acceptance. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that part is a really big piece for a lot of my patients with like feeling more confident in their ability to manage and tolerate distress.
Hmm.
That I think is huge. And then also just a change in how they see themselves. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
I make mistakes. I mess up sometimes,
Hmm.
but I'm still okay. Like I still have value,
Hmm.
um, even if I've made those mistakes. I think that that's another key thing that I see shifting.
Yeah, fail. I like to differentiate for my clients, like them failing at something, or a lot of them of like, I have a failed engagement, I have a failed relationship, and I'm like, okay, like by whose definition, first of all? Second of all, that doesn't make you a failure. A failure is defined as an unsuccessful attempt at something or a relationship. That doesn't mean, that's not like you're looking up in the dictionary and it's like failure, your face. Like that's not how it
Mhm.
is, but that's how it's interpreted. And so you're sharing, I think that's huge growth and probably a lot of installation of hope for people listening of like, oh, I actually can get to the point where I don't see myself making a mistake as I'm a mistake, or I don't see myself making or
Yes.
failing at something as I'm a failure, then to be able to
Right.
differentiate that.
Yeah, and I think that that is so important too. Like just even the fact that you can step back and say, I can do maybe even bad things, but I'm
Mhm.
not a bad person,
Right.
right? Like um I think so much of shame is what holds people back from real healing because they just feel so ashamed of who they are, what they've done. And obviously, shame is one of those non productive feelings. It's like
Mhm.
guilt is a productive feeling because usually, if it's appropriate guilt, it like
Mhm.
causes you to like reflect and be a
Motivates you to
better
behave
person.
differently. Yes, yes.
Yeah, but when it's shame, you feel kind of like, well, this is just who I am. So then you almost feel helpless. And then the self sabotage really happens because you're like, well, I'm not a good person. So I don't deserve good things in my life. So of
Mhm.
course, like this is supposed to happen to me. And then you actually create that reality.
Mhm. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there's like small doses of shame, if one can work through it and metabolize it and get out to the other side, can actually orient them more towards growth. It's the clients who get stuck in it. And there's a great book by, I think his name's John Bradshaw, Healing the Shame That Binds Us, and he goes deep into autonomy versus shame and doubt, which is that second stage of Erickson's psychosocial stages of development that we all journey through, but not all of us come out on the other side of unscathed. And sometimes we feel psychologically stuck, and we have more of the arrested development, even back to those very early years of that autonomy, not having the autonomy, but having shame and doubt instead. And then not having the initiative, we have that guilt instead, and being able to work through that, learn to metabolize, and like you're saying, lean more into the helpful guilt of, oh, that was not a good thing to do. I would like to not do that again, and therefore I will make this decision, rather than, well, I did this bad thing, so I'm a bad person and I'll never get out of it, and this just might be my lot in life. It's like, okay, let's slow it down. That's like an irrational belief. Let's rein it way back in. You actually can change if you want to. That's different than like people who are quote unquote bad, who like want to be bad, like the deviant, whatever, dark triad. Like, that's a separate topic. But for those of us who are like mostly quote unquote trying to do the right thing, and we make a mistake or mess up, you can orient back on the right path if you can tolerate moving through the guilt and shame and not getting stuck in it. It sounds like you're saying.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of times people do get really stuck in that guilt and shame, and they just can never move out of it. And then they tell themselves like a story about it. Right. And so much of that can hold them back from actually being like the best version of themselves. And yet, because it is so common, and like if you're also around other people who are doing the same thing, like it kind of feels like that's going to be your reality forever. And I just feel like it's such an important message that you're kind of getting out to your patients. Like, hey, like, no, like you can move past it, and you can create like a better future and a different way of resolving this issue.
Yeah. And I think the self-concept that they can have at the end of that, once they've processed it, they still think about maybe what they've done that they didn't like, or that was quote unquote bad or wrong, or that they failed at, but they're not then so unconscious to how they got there. They end up repeating it unintentionally, self-sabotaging. Well, how did I do this thing? If we can go back and take radical accountability for why that happened in the first place, why was it a failed engagement? Well, you proposed to somebody who told you that they didn't want to get married, or that they forced you into proposing and you didn't actually want to marry them, and then you wonder why the relationship ended because they had rampant untreated attachment concerns or self-concept. It was never going to work. It was never you. Not that I'm blaming the other person, but like this just was never going to be successful on both of your ends.
Never going to work.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And again, that goes back to like creating those same patterns over and over again, when really you need to be looking for another path, like why do you keep being attracted to this kind of person, as opposed to one that could actually validate you and support you in your self-development journey, like one that you've worked so hard on, like, and who we surround ourselves with is a really important part of this. Like, it's not about surrounding yourself with perfect people, because nobody's perfect, but it's more like, does this person support your overall objectives? Do they align with your top values? And I just feel like sometimes we forget to check in with like what truly matters to us. Like we get so pushed into like what we think we should want, or what society wants of us, or what we should be doing, and then like we end up attracting all the wrong people, which of course then does hinder your self-development journey as well.
So what advice would you give to someone listening that wants to chart a new path? They don't want to go down the same patterns.
Yeah, I would say that, if you are somebody who feels like you've just been doing like the same thing over and over and over, the first thing to do is to look at your values, identify what your top values are. These are not things that you can just check off of a list. These are things that, truly are ways in which you want to live your life. And then like taking a real stock of those around you and the things that you're doing every day. And it's like, are these things actually feeding my top values? And if not, like that's when you have to do the pivot, because this is sort of the motivation for it. Is like, well, you're saying these values are important to you, but these people in my life and their behaviors or my behaviors are not aligning with them. And that, I think, is the first place to start that change.
Yeah, I think living a life according to your own values and seeking congruency with other people's lives, it really is telling. And a lot of people, I mean, years ago, way before grad school, if you ask me my top core values, I've been like, what are you talking about? And ever since I learned them, I'm like, oh, that's in everything. That's in like my relationship course that I sell. That's in when I teach my students in the intro to psych and the other class, what was it? Psychology of effective behavior. Like that's a whole lesson that we cover, is like, you have to know your values, and you have to know that you have value. Both of those are equally as important. Allow that to guide whatever the path is. I can't tell you the type of person to date like an archetype, but I could tell you they probably have to have at least these things or these traits, like letting those top 2 or 3 traits guide the decision for the new path. And then
Right.
probably working with a therapist. Would you suggest that as well, or having some sort of self-development person cheering you on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that everybody needs somebody who is at least like a proxy or a
Hmm.
model for that
Yeah.
unconditional support.
Yes.
And in the beginning when you're like, "Well, I don't know if anybody in my life personally is that." Well, then use your therapist. Your
Yes.
therapist can be that first person,
Yes.
But
Yes.
you do need that. You need somebody who can reflect back to you like, "No, you're of value no matter what." You know?
Hmm.
And if you haven't experienced that with another person, like then the first person can be your therapist who's providing that. But
Hmm.
over time you will get better at being able to identify who those people are in your life, and
True.
also getting rid of anybody who shouldn't be in your inner circle, quite frankly. And sometimes we feel like we're obligated to put somebody in our inner circle, like, well, but that's my spouse, that's my sister. It's like, but who says that they have to be in your inner circle? Like
Yeah.
maybe they're not. And that doesn't mean that they don't add any value to your life.
Right.
But it's just, you have to be so conscious and protective of that inner circle, I think.
Yeah, and what you just brought up, I think, is like a good point to maybe wrap on. It's lessening the extreme or black or white thinking that they have no value or they're not anywhere
Yep.
close to the inner circle simply because they're not in it. It is just not true. There's a range. It's not,
Yep.
some things are, it is or it isn't. However, there is a lot of nuance when it comes to human relationships and those interpersonal dynamics that at a season of life, they're not in the inner circle because it just wouldn't make sense to have that. Like if my partner were able to understand what it would be like to be a woman and be pregnant, that would be much different. That's
Yeah.
not a season that most people, yeah, they're supportive, but they can only be so supportive that you might have a therapist, a doula, a women's group, a postpartum support group. That's
Right.
far more the people that are going to be in your inner circle at that season. But that doesn't mean then, as your child's getting older, I'm sure you could relate, like that would probably be a time where your partner's maybe probably pissing you off at certain points, but probably also like getting closer to being back in the inner circle because you're working on different parenting phases
Yeah.
together. It's not permanent. So it's not black or
Exactly.
white, and it's not always permanent, I think, are good takeaways.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I
Yeah.
think that some people are like, "I'm cutting out my mom, like, that's it." It's like, well, you can cut her out for now, but that doesn't mean that you'll never talk to her again. Like, that's also
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love that you're saying that that's, like, a great point for people to reflect upon as we wrap
Hmm.
up, because I
Hmm.
think that some people feel like it feels easier sometimes to be black or white, but that's just
Hmm.
not reflective of real life.
No. And there are things that are permanent, and you maybe at the end of whatever 20 years, you're like, oh, yeah, it happened to be that I went no contact for 20 years. But when I work with my clients, I caution them from trying to say to themselves that it's in perpetuity or permanent, because what
Right?
if they learn new information and want to change their mind? Then they feel like
Yep.
they're betraying that other part of themselves that was created to protect them and keep them safe internally. And it's like, wait, no, why would we get close to mom? I thought we hated mom. The other part's like,
Right.
well, no, we learned this new thing and she went to therapy and I think we actually should give it a chance. Then you're in this internal conflict where you're
Right.
sabotaging yourself, even though this other person is wanting to change and do the work. So I caution for making anything, like even to your self-talk, permanent. Like,
Yep.
it's like the just for today, like just for, from Al-Anon, like just for today I will try to do my best, just for today I'll let this go. Like that's all we can hope for.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. It's such a
Yeah.
great point.
Well, thank you for your time and your insight. And I would like to know where people can find you and where they can purchase your books.
Yeah, for sure. So please follow me on social media. Instagram's my primary platform, but I am on all of them at Dr. Judy Ho. And for free resources, you can sign up for my newsletter and visit my website at drjudyho.com.
Perfect. Thank you again for your time. And if anybody has any questions, please reach out to Dr. Judy. You're probably going to be totally happy to answer them. You're a wealth of knowledge. I love looking at your videos and listening to other interviews. I originally found you because I heard you on Dr. Drew, and then Jason
Oh,
had you on, and I was like, wait, I
oh,
know
amazing.
Jason. I can actually
That's so
reach out.
cool.
So
Yeah, Jason's
yeah,
so great. I'm so
yeah,
glad that he connected us. And thank
yeah.
you so much for all the great work that you're doing.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Heal Through Humor. If you like the show, can you please go on your favorite platform and like, rate, review, subscribe, all of the terms that we usually throw out I would really appreciate it. And I would love to get more listeners just like you in front of the podcast. And if you have an idea for a guest, please feel free to DM me at Talia Bombola. I would love to hear from you. Until then, I will see you on the next episode. Take care.